All
Anyway,
right. The next story comes from Dark Reading, and the title here is "Emerging Threats and Vulnerabilities to Prepare for in 2025." Lots of the standard fare, but some new things to think about. One
these
is
stories drive me a little crazy, by the way. I just want to say that up front. They drive me a little crazy.
I know that. That's why I picked it.
Thanks. I am effectively triggered. Good job.
You're welcome. So first is zero-day exploits, which I guess is not new, right? Kind of always there.
I will say the only thing that I've seen change recently is for a while we felt 0 days weren't going to be burned on random, low-level, non-nation state, non-high-value attacks. That seems to be changing. We do seem to see more using of 0 days for run-of-the-mill attacks, which is interesting to me. That's changed the equation a little.
Yeah, we covered a story a couple episodes back about how I think it was among the most commonly exploited vulnerabilities were 0 days. So I think you're right, but look, I think you have to kind of put them into different buckets because, like, as I think when some of us think about a 0 day, we're thinking like you know Safari escape plus a sandbox escape to get into versus like there's a cups vulnerability, or there's like a vulnerability in your Palo Alto firewall that is hanging straight on the internet. And so I'm not sure that like it's you can think about it as one homogeneous whole. I think there are certain types of 0 day vulnerabilities that are being withheld and used to perpetrate very targeted attacks. But then I think there's also like a class of like I'd just call them infrastructure type vulnerabilities that are used to hack en masse, and things like Log4j and Snowflake, and there's lots of
Yeah.
examples recently.
Yeah, and just to give a little context for listeners, the thought process is once you use a 0 day, it's burned, and that the manufacturers can patch against it. So it
Right.
loses its efficacy. I don't even know if that's true because people don't patch quickly. But that was always a thought process. It's why you see things like people looking for iPhone vulnerabilities, like up to $1 million, they'll pay for them. Like they want it for something substantial. So yeah, that class of stuff where you don't, the theory has always been that once you use it, it starts to lose its efficacy very quickly. I don't know. Maybe that's changing.
Well, I think that just this is the world according to Jerry, right? I think one of the big things that is big economic changes that has happened in attack tactics is how they're used. In the past, I think a lot of these vulnerabilities were thought of as means by which to get into organizations and facilitate APT style attacks. And I think more and more we're seeing these 0 day vulnerabilities not being used to like spy on people or perform corporate espionage, but to like effectively smash and grab ransomware attacks and stuff like that, where like it's the value is not in like getting deep into one person or one organization necessarily, but it's like trying to almost like a spam attack. Like you're sending your spam to as many people as you can, hoping you get a couple of people that fall for it. So I think that's one of the big dynamics that has changed. And by the way, this is one of the concerns I have is um is countries become much more sophisticated in their cyber operations, like their offensive operations. They're developing really sophisticated techniques to attack, their enemies, their adversaries. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum. The ransomware operators and like everybody is watching what's going on, and every time
Sure.
one of these operations gets detected and decomposed by some super energetic security company trying to make a name for themselves, like a lot of those techniques are adopted and embraced in this. So I think that's one of the reasons we see the world that we do right now, because I mean, obviously not all of those techniques are being used, but I think it's also, I blame in part the use of 0 days on threat actors, like commercial threat actors, trying to mirror what they see being effective in the nation state space. Now, I mean, that maybe I'm naive there, or sky is falling, but there you have it.
Well, I think there's a interesting corollary there, or at least the thought that occurred to me as we're talking about this. I know we've only gotten through one of these. We'll go faster. There's also very noisy attacks, which gets the press, which is what we're, in essence, reacting to. We're seeing that sort of survivorship bias of these are the types of attacks we're seeing. For the low and slow, quiet stuff, maybe we're not hearing about it, or it doesn't bubble up as much. I mean, we do have this very huge telco intrusion, supposedly from China, supposedly going out, supposedly can't kick out, not getting much press. We don't really know. Supposedly they're using backdoors. We don't know. There's a lot of unknowns there. So you wonder how much of that is deep penetration that's sitting there very quietly, that isn't motivated by a ransomware attack, or something similar. So it's not noisy. It doesn't make itself known.
Well, I think I can't disagree with that. I think a lot of the more advanced adversaries, unless their objective is destruction, you don't know that they're there until somebody makes a mistake or gets lucky.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Next is supply chain attacks. I'm almost getting uncomfortable with the term supply chain attack because it's become such a broad topic. Almost everything is a supply chain attack now. And so it's almost lost its meaning to me. But I think the point is, when you are consuming code in your code, or they call out the SolarWinds breach. And certainly that was a huge, still to this day, a really huge issue. And I am concerned, as I have been for years now, that the most problematic supply chain or any pick your avenue of attack is going to be the IT infrastructure management tools. And like we've seen it with Active Directory for years. We saw it with SolarWinds. I think we see it on and off again with things like Jenkins and whatnot. But I really think that this is where we are going to continue having a lot of problems, because I don't think we spend enough time. Like, those are becoming, inside our organizations or respective organizations, those are becoming our critical infrastructure. And I just don't think that a lot of organizations treat those with the care that they require.
No. Same. We've had the same thought of a lot of like vulnerability management tools or whatnot that can talk to everything in the environment, usually with administrative level access, right for manipulation and exploitation. I agree. One thing I did take away from this segment is, this is, and to be clear, this is riffing off of a webinar that was held with different people sort of giving their opinion on these things. So, just sort of quoting from the article, the complexity of modern supply chains make it challenging to secure all the dependencies. This underscores the need for rigorous third-party risk management. Okay. Sounds great. What does that mean?
Spreadsheets.
Frank, show me a rigorous third-party risk management that would have caught a phishing attack against a Google Chrome extension store plugin manipulation. How are you going to pick that up? How's that going to work? I'm so disenchanted with third-party risk management. It feels like just a bunch of window dressing and security theater.
It's effectively a platitude, right? It's like, it's do good stuff.
I don't disagree with the concept of, hey, you should vet your suppliers and what they do. And, maybe there is value in saying, yeah, show me your SOC 2, show me your ISO, show me that you've gone through these third-party audits that I can trust, et cetera, et cetera. But boy, it just feels like a ineffective process to me right now.
Well, so just to carry on with what you were saying, those things are informative, but they're not, they're not complete. So just because someone has a SOC 2 or an ISO SOA, or they have a PCI report, or whatever. It doesn't mean that they aren't also susceptible to falling for, as you pointed out, that getting the credentials to their Chrome store account phished, right? That there isn't a program that's going to give you that level of insight. I think that there's programs that will give you some indication about like the general health of their program. And so that's where I think some of the value in like those bit site type or security scorecard type reports, which I actually personally hate.
Oh, I hate them with a passion.
Coming from a cloud provider, I really
They're
hate
so
them.
inaccurate. They're so inaccurate.
But the aspiration is to help you understand what their general practices are. But the reality is, I think they tend to be kind of far off the mark in terms of like, what they're targeting and reporting on.
Yeah, I don't have a better solution, by the way, to be fair. I feel like it's a false sense of...
Yeah, it's one of those, like, we've got to do something. We have to do something.
Right, just do something. And I feel like it's a false sense of security. I really do.
And so because we have to do something, there's lots of companies standing around ready to take your money, ready and willing and able to take your money to help solve that problem. Meanwhile, every time something happens, we do the big spreadsheet dance. So
anyway, I know we're burning a lot of time on these.
But remote work infrastructure exploits. Look, this is, I think, not entirely novel, but I think, as we've talked about ad nauseum over the past couple of months, the things that we put at our network edge, your Fortinets and your Fives and Cisco, these things are not paragons of security unto themselves. And if you are not careful in how you manage them, I have personal experience that tells me a lot of attacks happen because these devices are not maintained. Companies buy them and they're expensive to keep support on. And I think there's this view, well, it's just a firewall. Like, it passes packets or doesn't pass packets. Why do I need a support contract on this? And that works until you get hacked. And anyway, that was one of the most common ways I saw suppliers, smaller suppliers especially, getting hacked, was through their out of support Cisco and other branded firewalls. But look, that's a big problem. Exploitation of AI and machine learning systems. This is, I think, a new an up and coming risk. And by the way, I think that there's, as I talk about in this little snippet, there's multiple flavors of this. You've got, and I think the next article we have also expands on this a little bit more, so I won't go too far into it. But you have AI as a means to perpetrate attacks, but then you also have AI as an attractive nuisance where you can inadvertently lose data or create other problems. So we'll get to that more.
I also think if you're a thought leader, it's a fun boogeyman to blame all things on, as a magical black box of unknown risk.
My God, some of the people talking about how this is like going to be civilization ending is pretty incredible.
Obviously, these articles drive me crazy because it's just thought leaders being thought leaders and just throwing a bunch of buzzwords out. Typically, by the way, that's related to whatever business they are involved with, how they can sell you a magic black box to fix it. I'm not saying there isn't value in looking ahead, and I'm not trying to rip on this particular article or this particular webinar. There's so many buzzwords, and this is why I don't do predictions, because I don't know how well anybody ever gets them right.
It'll be fun to go back and take a look. Although, when you kind of stack all these up, there's not a lot that doesn't fit into one of these.
Right, sure. What's the risk model I care about as a modern company? Here you go.
So, like, if I'm predicting the stock market, I'm going to say, well, some parts of it are going to go up and some parts of it are going to go down. And like at the end of the year, I'm going to be right.
Sure. I'm looking for a good place to say this, but I'll just say it here. I think, once again, don't get distracted by the new shiny. Get your basics right.
Yeah.
And then worry about the new shiny.
So the other one that, just kind of skipping around, there's a couple that I did want to focus on. One was API security. I'll lump that in with cloud security misconfigurations. Look, that's where I came from most recently, this is not like a slam on cloud providers. I think it is more an issue that the API economy is not mature, and a lot of these are exposed directly to the internet. They're not well thought through in terms of what the potential problems can be. We've seen that in spades over the past couple of years with not necessarily like breaches, but like abuse, where an API that was, offered for legitimate purposes was being abused for illegitimate purposes. And I think we're going to see more of that. But then there's also issues like I'll go back to the Capital One breach, which was, a while ago now. But I think that the problem that exemplifies, I don't think we've seen the bottom of. Like, I think that we're going to see a lot more of these because the cloud providers keep innovating at a increasing pace. Their environments are getting more sophisticated and complicated. And I think it's becoming more and more difficult to understand and wrap your head around how to keep these things secure, let alone, the fact that we keep having just like the basic S3 bucket problem continues to be a massive problem. And let alone, now that we have all these complex IAM policies, which, by the way, we did an interview with Chris Dodson and talked about that at length on Getting Defensive, if you want to go listen to that.
Shameless plug. No, I was just going to mention, not to mention the authentication side of this for non-human interfaces and that sort of thing has its own set of complexities that we're not handling well yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't disagree. I do think it's an area of unmanaged risk for sure.
So their forecast for ransomware I thought was a little bit interesting. It says some threat. This is a quote. Some threat actors have moved to deleting data as part of their normal motions. He says, if this gains traction in 2025, organizations will not have a method to recover by simply paying the ransom and hoping to get a working decryption tool. The only method of recovery will be backups. However, data shows that backups do not typically survive these breaches.
Well, that's an interesting statement, right? So if I know you've deleted my data, why would I pay you to unencrypt it? So that's sort of, there must be more to that story. Unless it's like, hey, we've got an off-site copy of it that we'll send back to you. It might be part of the ransom.
I can only assume that is, but that doesn't scale well, especially like if you think about, if you're talking about like a file server, that kind of makes sense. But if you're talking about, an environment where thousands of workstations have all been ransomware, like that doesn't work.
I understand the exfiltration aspect of it, and then extorting you to pay so I don't exfil this to the public, but this threw me off. The other thing I thought that was interesting is backups not surviving. I have noticed that most of the major cloud providers are now offering services that are sort of like one-way backups that are, they have terms for it. I'm trying not to get too buzzwordy here, but where the backup is somewhat separate from your account and it's abstracted from your account, and you can pipe backups into it, but you can't modify it further. Like, so a bad actor couldn't go in there and then delete stuff and modify stuff. Now, I'm assuming in the instance of you need to recover, you'd have to go and work with the cloud provider to give you that information back. But it seems to me that some of the cloud providers are starting to try to build some services for this sort of problem, where somebody deletes your main data set, but your backup set, because it's usually within the same account, typically.
Super important that you take advantage of that if you can. I've said it before on this in our other shows. One of the big problems I saw when I was in cloud is customers having a misunderstanding about what kind of recovery was possible without the customer taking some kind of overt action to back up their data.
It's not just magic.
It isn't just magic. I will say the other concern I have, and this is an unfounded concern. So just, I'll put that caveat out there. Providers unto themselves are becoming increasing, like, concentration of risk. And so, there's the old joke about how cloud is just somebody else's computer. And at the end of the day, it's not wrong. It's obviously a lot more complicated than that. And, when you look at a cloud from the outside, it looks pretty homogeneous and whatnot, but behind the scenes, it tends to be, pretty heterogeneous mishmash of different technologies put together. And so it's like not necessarily easy. Like you wouldn't you wouldn't see a normal kind of a worm have success under the covers in the cloud, because there's so many different types of technologies under there. But the reality is, like, that is, those cloud providers are becoming, I have to imagine, an increasingly attractive target.
Sure.
And
Now,
so yeah.
you would hope it's also a concentration of defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But at the
Yeah.
same time, if you're scoring off, if it's AWS scoring off against, a foreign intelligence agency, like, it's tough. And the reason I say that is that things like the write once, read many, the cold backup storage, where those typically are presentation layer concepts. Like, behind the scenes, they're just hard drives. And so if someone were able to compromise the underlying systems that host those things, presumably they would be able to delete it. And now you're at the point of having to really rely on the security that the cloud providers are providing. And I think, as far as I'm aware, we haven't really seen, and I don't count the Azure, some of the Azure, like the Office 360 stuff is like in this bucket. We haven't seen like a major breach below the line in a cloud provider like that, at least that I can recall. But I've got to believe that, like, there's a lot of jiggling of door handles. So anyway,
something your mom's door handle, something. Go on.
I had to happen sooner or later.
That's what she said.
Glad you got that out of your system.